There are sins happening inside churches every single Sunday that nobody talks about, nobody confronts, and nobody even recognizes as sin anymore. Not because they are hidden, but because they have been given respectable names. They sound spiritual, they feel virtuous, they fit perfectly inside the culture of a modern church without raising a single eyebrow. And that is exactly what makes them so dangerous. The most destructive sins in the church today are not the ones that look like sin. They are the ones that have learned to look like godliness. Today, we are going to expose 5 of the most common sins happening inside churches every single Sunday. Sins disguised in spiritual language that most believers never recognize because they feel not only acceptable, but virtuous. Stay until the end, because the 5th one is the most widespread and the most spiritually deceptive of all. Drop a comment below and tell us what country you are watching from, and let's get into it. The first sin happening inside churches every Sunday is pride disguised as spiritual maturity. You will find this person in almost every congregation. The one who has been a Christian the longest, who knows the most theology, who corrects others' biblical references mid-conversation, who sighs visibly when the pastor says something theologically imprecise, who evaluates every sermon not as a member of the congregation, but as a critic with superior knowledge. They have convinced themselves that what they are experiencing is discernment. What they are actually experiencing is pride that has learned to speak the language of doctrine. And because it sounds so biblical, nobody challenges it, including themselves. The book of 1 Corinthians, chapter 8, verse 1, contains a warning that cuts directly through this. Knowledge puffs up, while love builds up. Paul is not saying knowledge is wrong. He is saying that knowledge without love produces inflation, a swelling of self that looks like wisdom from the inside and looks like arrogance from everyone around it. The book of Proverbs, chapter 16, verse 18, states it with even more force. Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. The most dangerous version of pride in the church is not the kind that announces itself. It is the kind that has convinced itself it is actually humility, the kind that looks down on others while using the language of concern for their spiritual condition. God is not impressed by theological precision in a heart that has never been broken by its own unworthiness. And the second sin on this list is even harder to identify because it hides behind one of the most genuinely spiritual activities a believer can engage in. The second sin happening inside churches every Sunday is envy disguised as intercession. It sounds like prayer. It is offered in the prayer meeting, in the small group, in the quiet conversation before service. Someone shares a concern about a brother or sister who is experiencing success, a promotion, a growing ministry, a flourishing marriage, a financial breakthrough, and frames it as a burden they are carrying for that person. I just feel like something is off in their life. I really feel like God is asking me to pray for them. But if you could see inside the heart behind those words, what you would find is not compassion. You would find the quiet, burning resentment of someone who wanted what that person has and cannot bring themselves to celebrate it. The book of James, chapter 3, verse 16, is precise about where envy leads. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. Envy does not stay contained. It spreads. It poisons relationships, distorts perceptions, and eventually produces exactly the disorder James describes. The book of 1 Corinthians chapter 13 verse 4 states that love does not envy. And that means that every time a genuine follower of Christ encounters someone else's blessing, the response should be celebration, not the carefully disguised resentment that masquerades as spiritual concern. The test is simple. When someone you secretly envy experiences something good, does your first instinct feel like joy, or does it feel like the need to find something wrong with it? God sees the difference even when the prayer language sounds identical. And the third sin is one you have almost certainly witnessed this week, possibly without even registering it as sin at all. The third sin happening inside churches every Sunday is gossip disguised as prayer requests. Someone stands up during prayer time and says, "I have a prayer request," and then proceeds to share every intimate detail of someone else's private struggle. Their marriage problems, their financial crisis, their secret sin, their family conflict. It sounds spiritual. It sounds like genuine concern. But the person whose private life is being broadcast to the entire room never gave their permission for that information to be shared. The prayer request is gossip with a religious introduction. The only thing that changed is the first three words. The book of Proverbs, chapter 16, verse 28, states that a gossip separates close friends, and placing the word prayer in front of it does not change what it does to relationships and to trust. The Apostle Paul, in the book of Romans, chapter 1, verses 29 and 30, lists gossips alongside murderers, God-haters, and the insolent, not as a minor personality flaw, but as evidence of a mind that has rejected God. The standard for sharing someone else's information is not whether you can frame it as a prayer request. The standard is whether that person would be comfortable knowing you shared it. If the answer is no, what you are about to say is gossip, regardless of how you introduce it. And this tendency to disguise sin in spiritual language reaches a level of personal discomfort in the fourth sin that most Christians will not admit to, even privately. The fourth sin happening inside churches every Sunday is lust disguised as appreciation. It happens in the worship team, in the small group, in the row behind you during service. Someone notices an attractive person and the thought is immediately reframed, not as the sexual attention it actually is, but as innocent admiration, as appreciation for how God made someone, as a passing thought that does not count because it was never acted on. The disguise is so effective that most people genuinely do not recognize what is happening until the thought has already gone somewhere it should not have gone. And by the time they recognize it, they have already decided it was not really lust, because it did not look like what they imagine lust is supposed to look like. Jesus addressed this with a precision that leaves no room for reframing in the book of Matthew chapter 5, verse 28. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. The sin is not in the action. The sin is in the sustained, intentional, indulgent attention that treats another person as an object for personal gratification. The book of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 3 through 5 commands believers to avoid sexual immorality and to control their own bodies in a way that is holy and honorable, not managed, not minimized, not reframed as appreciation, but controlled. The church is not exempt from this struggle. It is the place where the struggle most needs to be named honestly, rather than disguised in language that makes it feel acceptable. And the fifth and final sin is the one that makes all the others possible, because it is the one that has replaced the object of the church's worship without most people ever noticing the substitution. The fifth and most spiritually deceptive sin happening inside churches every Sunday is idolatry disguised as worship. Not the obvious kind. Nobody in a modern evangelical church is bowing to a golden statue. The kind that is happening is far more subtle and far more dangerous, precisely because it looks identical to genuine worship from the outside. It is the worship of the experience itself, the worship of the feeling that the music produces, the worship of the community, the belonging, the identity of being part of something meaningful, the worship of the pastor whose insights feel like personal revelation. People come to church not to encounter God, but to encounter what encountering God feels like. And when the feelings are absent, they conclude that God was absent, without ever questioning whether they were ever actually seeking Him or seeking the sensation. The book of John, chapter 4, verse 24, records Jesus defining genuine worship with two requirements. God is spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the spirit and in truth, not in feeling, not in atmosphere, not in the emotional peak produced by a well-crafted worship set, in spirit and in truth, meaning genuine, internal, honest engagement with the living God, regardless of what the music sounds like or how the lighting is set. The book of Isaiah, chapter 29, verse 13, records God's assessment of worship that has become disconnected from genuine devotion. These people come near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. Their worship of me is based on merely human rules they have been taught. God is not interested in worship that is directed at the experience of worship. He is looking for people whose hearts are actually turned toward him, not toward the feeling, not toward the community, not toward the leader, but toward him alone. These 5 sins are dangerous, not because they are obvious, but because they are invisible. They have learned to speak the language of the church so fluently that most believers never recognize them for what they are. But God is not impressed by spiritual language wrapped around unrepentant sin. He is looking for people honest enough to call things what they actually are, and humble enough to bring them to him for genuine transformation. Which of these 5 sins hit you hardest today? Comment below and tell us what country you are watching from. If this video challenged something you needed to hear, please like it, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications and share it with someone who needs this truth. We have more honest and powerful content coming, and you do not want to miss what is next. May God give you the courage to name what is actually happening in your heart and the grace to let him change it.